Bowmaker Highknoll received a slew of items from his late uncle. He inherited debts, letdowns, and a ranch that had been lifeless for over 2 years. Yet he never foresaw inheriting another man's desperate secret. A woman stood in his kitchen, clad in a ragged dress that had once been white. Her dark hair was tangled with dust and something that resembled dried blood. What unsettled him most was not her looks, but the manner in which she gripped the rusted kitchen knife. She held it, not as if she were defending herself, but as if she had already chosen what she was prepared to give up. "You're going to have sex with me," she declared, her voice unwavering. Even though his hands trembled, Bowmaker let the saddlebag he was hauling slip, the thud resonating through the vacant house like gunfire. The woman remained unmoved. She stood barefoot on the warped planks, waiting for his reply with the patience of someone who had already lost everything of value. Behind her, he could observe where she had taken up residence, a makeshift cot in a corner, tidy rows of empty cans, and scratched markings on the wall that formed a day-counting calendar. The ranch had lain empty at the moment of his uncle's death. Every resident of town corroborated that fact. So, how long had she been staying there? And why did she seem to be awaiting another person to cross that doorway? Bowmaker lifted his hand deliberately, as one might approach a wounded beast. "Miss, I believe there's been some sort of mistake," he said. Her hold on the knife tightened. "There is no mistake," she replied. "Your presence now signals that they'll arrive soon, and when they do, they'll demand to know why you kept me alive." She stepped nearer, and Bowmaker saw the desperation blazing in her eyes. "Either we follow my plan, or we both meet death," she warned. The floorboards groaned beneath his boots as he moved back toward the exit, while she mirrored his motion with a predator's precision. Whatever pushed her to this point was not insanity. It was pure calculation. She had orchestrated this dialogue, rehearsed it, perhaps even trial run it on earlier visitors who never managed to leave alive. "Who's coming?" Bowmaker whispered, his voice barely audible. For the first time since entering the house, a hint of uncertainty crossed her face. She glanced at the window, where the late afternoon shadows were already spilling across the deserted corral. "You really don't know, do you?" she murmured. The knife trembled slightly in her hand. "Then why have you come?" Bowmaker retrieved the inheritance documents from his coat pocket. These legal papers were what had led him to this god-forsaken place. Yet, as he spread them out, he saw something that chilled his blood. The deed bore an incorrect date. Not merely inaccurate, but impossible. According to the documents, his uncle had transferred the ranch 6 months after his own death. The woman noticed the shift in his expression and gave a smile for the first time. But the smile lacked any warmth. "Now you're beginning to comprehend," she said. "My uncle's bequest was more than just a ranch." Bowmaker gave a firm rap on the door. "He also handed me a dilemma that has been spreading through these walls like a disease." She recognized his name. She had been waiting solely for his arrival. From far away, Bowmaker swore he could hear approaching horses, their hooves beating against the packed earth as if counting down to a danger he was not ready for. The pounding of hooves grew louder, while Theodora Ironforge acted with seasoned precision, evidence of countless narrow escapes. She snatched a battered leather satchel from under the improvised bedding and started filling it with the empty cans. Every motion she made was purposeful and sparing, as if she knew that any needless action could be fatal. "How many are on their way?" Bowmaker queried, stepping toward the window. "Don't," he warned. Her tone snapped sharp, like a lash. "They'll spot your silhouette and realize a newcomer has arrived. Then they'll set the whole place ablaze with us trapped inside." Bowmaker halted, his hand hovering inches from the dusty curtain. The horse noises drew nearer, perhaps only a quarter mile away. He could pick out at least 3 separate hoofbeats, maybe even more. Who are they? Theodora slung the bag over her shoulder and walked to what looked like a solid wall panel. Her fingertips located concealed notches in the timber, and a panel swung inward, exposing a tight opening behind the kitchen. Men who act as if they can claim everything, me included. The concealment was just wide enough for a single body, yet she motioned him onward. Bowmaker lingered. Every aspect of this scenario contradicted every instinct he had honed over 40 years. The sensible move would have been to exit through the front, saddle his horse, and flee the nightmare his uncle left. Instead, he slipped into the tight nook beside Theodora, close enough to catch the scent of her fearful sweat and feel the tension emanating from her like a furnace glow. She slammed the panel shut behind them, plunging them into total darkness, save for narrow wood gaps that let Bowmaker glimpse slivers of the kitchen. The hoofbeats ceased right outside the building. Leather rustled as the men disembarked. Spurs clinked against the wooden steps. The front door burst inward with a bang that rattled the walls. "Search every room," a voice ordered. The speaker's accent was unfamiliar, perhaps German or Dutch. She had been here not long ago. The fireplace ashes remained warm. In the blackness, Theodora's hand located Bowmaker's arm. She clasped him desperately. She pressed her lips to his ear and whispered, "If they catch us, claim you were merely passing through. Say you never saw me." Heavy boots hammered across the floor above. Something shattered. Furniture toppled as a different, younger, eager voice called out while searching. "Boss! Look at this!" someone shouted. New saddlebags lay by the doorway. Bowmaker felt his heart drop. Theodora's startling proposition caused him to drop his gear. The men would be led directly to him now because of it. "A newcomer has arrived," the accented voice declared, his satisfaction palpable. "Search through the barn. Inspect the well. Check every place a man could be concealed." After a moment's silence, he added, "Bring me the satchel from upstairs, the one containing her personal items." Bowmaker could feel Theodora tense up in the darkness. Whatever that satchel contained, it was important enough for her to risk everything. However, she was here with him, indicating she had to abandon it. The searching continued for what seemed like an eternity, but probably only lasted a few minutes. Finally, the foreign voice spoke up once more. "She was present, but she's departed now. She's probably heading for the river crossing." The sound of boots faded away. "We'll get her there, but we'll first set this place ablaze, ensure she has nothing to return to." Bowmaker could see one of the men through the gaps in the wood, pouring something from a container onto the kitchen floor. The distinct aroma of coal oil permeated the air. In a matter of moments, the entire house would be engulfed in flames. Theodora was now shaking, her breaths shallow and rapid. Nevertheless, her voice was firm when she spoke. "When I tell you to go, leave through the back. Do not seek me out. Refrain from assisting me. Just escape." The scent of coal oil intensified as more of the liquid was splashed across the wooden floors. Bowmaker could hear the men moving methodically through the house, preparing to turn it into a raging fire, but Theodora hadn't yet signaled for him to flee. She remained motionless in the darkness, attuned to something he couldn't perceive. "Boss," the younger voice called from the floor above. "Discovered something intriguing." Loud footsteps echoed down the staircase. "What is it?" Letters. Numerous letters bound with ribbon, all addressed to an Alara ironforge. In the darkness, Bowmaker felt Theodora's body tense up completely. Her breathing ceased entirely. He watched through the gaps in the wood as the foreign man scrutinized the letters by the light of a lamp. The man looked older than Bowmaker anticipated, perhaps 60, with silver hair and knuckles bearing scars from a life of violence. "Alara Ironforge," the man repeated, savoring the name as if it were wine. So that is the alias she is using currently. How very sentimental. She retained her family name. He placed the letters inside his coat. These will prove useful. Shall we still burn the building down? The younger man inquired. No. The foreign man grinned. Even from their hiding place, Bowmaker could discern the cruelty in his expression. Leave it standing. She'll eventually return for these letters. When she does, we'll be ready. The men gathered their equipment and proceeded toward the door. Just as Bowmaker started to relax, a disaster occurred. His boot shifted slightly in the cramped space, and his spur scraped against the wooden panel behind them. The sound was faint, scarcely noticeable, but in the sudden stillness of the house, it resonated like a chime. The sound of footsteps stopped. Did you hear that? Bowmaker huddled closer to Theodora, wishing he could disappear, but there was no escape. The hiding place, which had seemed clever just moments before, now felt like a prison. He could hear the stranger approaching. His boots, testing each floorboard, sounded like metal on wood. The younger voice offered an explanation. Maybe a rat got into something. Rats don't wear spurs. The stranger was now directly in front of their hiding spot. Bowmaker could see his shadow through the gaps. Someone's in this house. Theodora's hand found the knife she'd dropped when they'd hidden. Her fingers wrapped around the handle with familiar ease. Bowmaker realized with a chilling certainty that she'd used that blade before, and not just for mundane tasks. The man's hand pressed against the wood panel, testing it. This section sounds hollow. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. Come out now, and I might let you keep breathing. Instead of responding, Theodora did something Bowmaker hadn't anticipated. She reached up and dislodged a piece of the wooden wall above them. Dirt and debris fell as she created a small opening. Through it, Bowmaker could see a sliver of sky. There was another way out, through the space between the walls and up to the roof. But climbing would make noise, more noise than a single scrape of a spur. The kind of noise that would bring all three men running with their weapons drawn. The stranger pressed harder against the panel. Wood creaked ominously. I'm going to count to 3. If you're not out by then, I'll put a bullet through this wall. 1. Theodora looked at Bowmaker in the dim light filtering down from above. Her eyes held a question. Trust me or die here? 2. She started climbing, her movement surprisingly graceful for someone ascending through a space barely wider than her shoulders. Bowmaker followed, his heart hammering as every small sound seemed amplified in the confined space. 3. The gunshot exploded through the kitchen, splintering wood exactly where they'd been hiding moments before. The bullet shredded through the wooden panel like paper, sending splinters flying in all directions. Bowmaker hauled himself up through the narrow opening just as another shot rang out below them. This one punched through the ceiling inches from his boots, close enough that he could feel the heat from the muzzle flash. Theodora was already moving across the roof with the sure-footed grace of someone who'd made this escape before. The late afternoon sun had baked the wooden shingles until they were hot enough to burn through cloth, but she navigated them like stepping stones across a stream. Bowmaker followed, trying to match her movements while voices shouted below. They're on the roof. Bramson, get around back. Drakeys watched the sides. The old shingles groaned under their combined weight. Several of them came free completely, sliding off the rooftop and crashing to the ground with sounds that could easily have been mistaken for signal fires. Theodora approached the edge and looked down at the 20-foot drop to the hardened earth beneath. There's a water barrel behind the barn, she whispered. If we can get to it, we can soften the impact. Bowmaker followed her gaze. The barrel was only about 8 feet away from the house. It was a leap that demanded flawless timing and more fortune than he had experienced in years. And if we miss, we'll die quickly instead of slowly." She turned to him, and for the first time since he had met her, he noticed something beyond desperation in her eyes. It was a mix of resolve and what appeared to be gratitude. "Thank you for staying." Most men would have run. Before he could reply, she had already gone over the edge, her body soaring through the air with arms extended. She struck the water barrel with a splash that sent liquid flying everywhere, then rolled away from the impact zone just as Bowmaker propelled himself after her. His aim was not as accurate. He grazed the side of the barrel, felt it tilt and spill its contents, then collided with the muddy ground hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. A sharp pain shot through his left shoulder, but nothing seemed broken. Theodora was already yanking him to his feet. "Move! They'll be around the corners any moment." They sprinted toward the line of cottonwood trees that marked the start of the creek bed. Behind them, Bowmaker heard the men splitting up, their boots thudding against the hard ground as they attempted to encircle the area. A rifle shot rang out, and bark flew from a tree trunk near Bowmaker's head. They reached the creek and plunged into the shallow water. Using the banks as cover, the rapid current made the footing unstable, but would also wash away their tracks. Theodora guided them downstream, moving with the assuredness of someone who knew every stone and curve. "The letters?" Bowmaker panted as they raced through the water, almost losing their balance. "Elara Ironforge. That's your true name." She glanced over her shoulder at him, her expression inscrutable. "Ilara's dead. She has been for 3 years. Theodora is just trying to remain that way." "What was in those letters? What did they want with them?" "Proof," she replied simply. "Proof of something that could destroy more than just me." A shout rang out from behind them. One of the men had found their trail. The chase was closing in, and ahead, Bowmaker could see the creek widening into a broader valley. There would be no more cover, nowhere else to escape. That's when Theodora halted in the water and turned to him with a look that made his blood run cold. "Bowmaker, you need to listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe you know about your uncle." The creek water swirled around their feet as Theodora grasped Bowmaker's arm, her hold intense. The cries behind them grew nearer, and far off, Bowmaker could hear riders spurring their horses for a swifter chase. "Your uncle didn't succumb to fever as the townsfolk were told," Theodora whispered, her voice barely cutting through the rush of water. "Henricus Gripforge took his life slowly, and forced me to watch." Bowmaker felt the world tilt to the side. "Henricus Gripforge," the foreign accent said, referring to the scar-knuckled man who had tried to set them ablaze. That can't be true. Uncle Lucian had died in his own bed. The physician had verified it. The physician had been paid to give that verification. Theodora drew him farther into the stream, where a drooping willow offered brief cover. Lucian possessed proof that Silvermane was funneling arms to Indian tribes, sparking conflict so he could sell provisions to both factions. Your uncle intended to hand him over to the federal marshals. The noises of the chase grew louder. Bowmaker began to distinguish individual voices, coordinating their search. Yet Theodora's revelation struck him harder than any bullet ever could. His uncle had been the most upright person he ever knew, the sort who would return a misplaced penny, even if it meant a 20-mile trek to the nearest town. "How do you know all of this?" Bowmaker murmured. "Because I was Lucian's witness. He employed me to record Silvermane's dealings, dates, locations, weapons shipments. I read and write better than most men, and I was already teaching in the territory." Her jaw tightened. "I was foolish enough to believe that doing what was right would keep me safe." A gunshot rang out, snapping a branch above their heads. One of the hunters had seen movement near the willow. Bowmaker seized Theodora's hand and they dove deeper into the creek, using the bend to increase the gap between them and their pursuers. "The letters we uncovered," Bowmaker said, while they kept moving. "Those are your reports? Some of them?" Others turned out to be private letters exchanged with Lucian. He was... She stopped, a flush creeping up her cheeks, despite the desperate moment. He was courting me earnestly, with plans to marry. A grim picture started to assemble in Bowmaker's mind. His uncle, a widower for 15 years, had finally met someone who cared for him, a person who shared his sense of justice and his determination to fight corruption, and that bond had led to both of their deaths. "Vice killed him to keep the evidence from reaching the marshals," Bowmaker observed. "Yet you only just managed to escape. Lucian hid me on the ranch once he sensed Silvermane was after us. But Silvermane tortured him until he disclosed where I was concealed. I fled amid the struggle." "But Lucian?" Her voice cracked slightly. "He gave his life, protecting me." They arrived at a deeper stretch of the creek, forcing them to wade waist-deep in the current. The icy water shocked them, but it would greatly hinder anyone trying to track them. Behind them, the voices had dispersed, covering a wider area but losing their focus. "Why didn't you report this to the authorities yourself?" Bowmaker inquired. Theodora's laughter was tinged with bitterness. "With what evidence? Vice holds sway over half the territorial government, while the other half fears crossing him. The only information that could incriminate him was contained in those letters, and now he's reclaimed them." A new sound reached them, dogs barking in the distance. Vice had brought in tracking hounds, indicating their time in the water was running out. The dogs would soon catch their scent once more. Bowmaker made a choice that astonished even himself. "Then we reclaim them." Theodora paused and fixed her gaze on him. "That's madness. Silvermane has 6 men with him, possibly more." "Perhaps. But you stated it yourself. You're the sole witness to what happened to Lucian. Without you, Silvermane escapes justice." Bowmaker held her gaze. "I won't allow my uncle's murderer to go unpunished." The barking dogs drew nearer, their eager barks reverberating against the canyon walls like a harbinger of violence. Theodora shook her head in response to Bowmaker's proposal, water dripping from her dark hair as she pressed against the creek bank. "You don't grasp the implications of what you're suggesting. Silvermane not only has men at his disposal, he has influence: judges, sheriffs, and territorial officials. Even if we somehow retrieved those letters, who would be trustworthy enough to turn to?" Bowmaker had been contemplating the same dilemma. However, a thought was taking shape. Federal marshals operate beyond a territorial authority. Lucian was trying to contact them for a reason. He studied her expression as the light faded. "Do you recall which marshal he intended to reach?" "Battlemaster Riverbend out of Denver." "But, Bowmaker, that's over 200 miles through territory controlled by Silvermane. We'd never make it." They heard the sound of splashing coming from upstream. Their pursuers had located the creek and were following it downstream, using the same reasoning that had facilitated Bowmaker and Theodora's escape. They had no more than 10 minutes before the trap snapped shut. "There's another option," Bowmaker said, an idea solidifying in his mind. "Silvermane believes he's tracking a school teacher and an unsuspecting heir. He doesn't realize I've been managing cattle drives for 15 years, or that I'm familiar with every path between here and Colorado." Theodora looked at him with what could have been hope, if hope weren't such a perilous luxury in their predicament. "Even if we reach Denver, Silvermane would still pursue us. He can't afford to let either of us survive now. Then we ensure he can't follow." Bowmaker grasped her hand and pulled her toward the far bank, where a thicket of dense brush provided temporary cover. "But first, we must double back and retrieve those letters." "That's crazy. They'll anticipate our flight, not our return." "Exactly." Bowmaker assisted her in scaling the muddy bank, his boots slipping on the slick earth. Silvermane is clever, but he's also overconfident. He thinks we're desperate prey, scrambling in fear. He wouldn't anticipate our return to his camp. They arrived at the tree line just as the initial dog rounded the creek's bend. The animal instantly picked up their scent and began to howl with fresh excitement. More dogs joined the chorus, and Bowmaker could hear men yelling orders in response. There. Theodora indicated a game trail leading up the hillside. That path connects to the old mining road. If we can reach it undetected, we can get above Silvermane's camp. They started climbing, using rocks and tree roots for support. The trail was steep and dangerous, particularly with wet clothes and mud-covered boots. Behind them, the dogs had reached the spot where they had left the creek, and the barking grew louder. "Bowmaker," Theodora said as they climbed. "There's something else about those letters. Something I didn't tell you." He stopped, looking back at her. In the growing darkness, he could hardly see her face, but her voice carried a weight that made his stomach tighten. Lucian wasn't just documenting Silvermane's weapon sales. He uncovered something bigger. Silvermane isn't acting alone. He's part of a network. Those weapons aren't just going to Indian tribes. They're being funneled to groups planning to overthrow territorial governments. Bowmaker felt a chill that had nothing to do with their wet clothes. If Theodora was right, they weren't just dealing with a murderous arms dealer. They were facing something that could destroy the entire frontier. Below them, torchlight flickered through the trees as Silvermane's men began their systematic search. The old mining road gave them the high ground they needed, but it also exposed them to anyone watching from below. Bowmaker and Theodora moved cautiously along the rocky path, using scrub brush and boulders for cover as they made their way toward Silvermane's camp. From their vantage point, they could see the orange glow of a campfire in the valley below. Silvermane had made camp in the ruins of an old way station, using the partial walls for windbreak and defense. Bowmaker counted. At least 4 horses were picketed nearby, indicating some of his men were still out searching. "There," Theodora whispered, pointing to a figure sitting close to the fire. "That's Silvermane. He's got something in his hands." Bowmaker squinted through the darkness. The man was reading by firelight, occasionally holding papers up to catch more illumination. The letters. He was going through Lucian's evidence right there in the open. "Arrogant bastard thinks he's already won," Bowmaker muttered. They worked their way down the hillside, moving from shadow to shadow. The approach was treacherous. Loose rocks threatened to betray their position with every step, and they had to freeze whenever one of the remaining men moved around the camp. As they got closer, Bowmaker could make out more details. Silvermane had spread the letters across a flat rock like he was studying a map. 2 men sat nearby, cleaning their rifles and whispering about the search. A 3rd man kept watch at the edge of the firelight, but his attention was focused outward, towards the creek where they expected their target to appear. "The watch is facing the wrong way," Bowmaker said. "If we can reach those rocks behind the camp, we might create a distraction." Theodora nodded and then grabbed his arm. "Bowmaker, once we do this, there's no turning back. Silvermane would hunt us to the ends of the earth. He's already doing that." Bowmaker checked his revolver, ensuring all 6 chambers were loaded. "At least this way, we die fighting instead of running." They separated, Bowmaker circling left while Theodora moved right. The plan was simple. She would create noise and movement on one side of the camp, drawing the guards' attention, while Bowmaker grabbed the letters and anything else that might serve as evidence. Bowmaker reached his position behind a pile of rubble that had once been part of the way station's wall. From there, he was maybe 20 feet from where Silvermane sat reading. Close enough to see the older man's scarred hands turning pages, close enough to hear him chuckling at whatever Lucian had written about his illegal activities. A stone clattered down the hillside on the far side of camp, Theodora's signal. The watchmen immediately turned toward the sound, rifles raised. The two men by the fire grabbed their weapons and moved to investigate, but Silvermane remained seated, the letters still spread before him. Bowmaker broke cover and sprinted toward the fire. Silvermane looked up just as Bowmaker dove across the flat rock, scattering papers in all directions. The older man was faster than his age suggested. His hand found the pistol at his belt before Bowmaker could grab all the letters. "Henricus Gripforge," Bowmaker panted, stuffing papers inside his shirt. "You murdered my uncle." Silvermane smiled, his gun now pointed at Bowmaker's chest. Lucian Highknoll was a meddling fool who didn't understand the changing times, just like his nephew. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out from across the camp. Theodora was in trouble. Bowmaker could hear men shouting, boots running, but Silvermane remained focused on him, the pistol steady in his scarred grip. "Those letters won't do you any good," Silvermane said conversationally. "Even if you somehow escape, who will you give them to?" "I own everyone who matters in this territory." Bowmaker had managed to gather most of the papers, but several remained scattered around the rock. As he reached for another one, Silvermane cocked his pistol. "I think that's enough, Mr. Highknoll. Time to join your uncle." The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined space of the ruined way station, but it wasn't Silvermane who fired. Theodora stood at the edge of the firelight, her smoking revolver trained on Henricus Gripforge's motionless form. The arms dealer was splayed out on the large flat rock where he'd been reading Lucian's letters, his blood gradually tainting, the proof that would have convicted him. "What about the others?" Bowmaker inquired, picking up the scattered papers. "Are they dead, or did they escape?" Theodora's tone was unwavering, although Bowmaker noticed her hands quivering slightly. "Bramson attempted to seize me from the rear. Upon witnessing his boss's fate, Drakey's fled." Securing the letters inside of his shirt, Bowmaker went to examine Silvermane's corpse. The man was unequivocally dead. Theodora's gunshot had hit him square in the chest, likely penetrating his heart. A silver chain hung around his neck, adorned with a medallion unfamiliar to Bowmaker. It featured some sort of European design, bearing symbols that held no meaning for him. "We have to search him," Bowmaker stated. "As you mentioned, if he was connected to a larger organization, there should be more evidence." They moved swiftly, mindful that Drake Keys or other survivors could be back alongside reinforcements. Silvermane possessed a leather portfolio containing maps showing the locations of weapon stashes, listings of contacts within the territorial administrations, and communications with an individual known only as their general. This person was the apparent leader of the conspiracy Theodora had spoken of. Reading one of the letters, Bowmaker declared, "This is far more serious than we had realized. They are plotting to destabilize 3 territories at the same time, then put in place their own hand-picked leaders." Theodora, reholstering her revolver, corrected him. "We're planning." "It's difficult to manage a conspiracy when you're dead. They gathered everything valuable, weapons, horses, and most importantly, the complete collection of evidence that Lucian Highknoll gave his life trying to safeguard." As they got ready to leave the devastated station, Bowmaker came to a decision that took even him by surprise. "We aren't running towards Denver," he stated. "We are heading back into town." Theodora regarded him incredulously. "Are you out of your mind?" Silvermane claimed he had bought off everyone who held importance. While he said he controlled everyone of importance in the territory, federal law takes precedence over territorial authority. Bowmaker climbed onto Silvermane's horse, a magnificent black stallion, feeling that justice was being served. "There's a telegraph station in town. We will send everything we have found to Battlemaster Riverbend together with our location," Bowmaker continued, and added, "Let him come to us." 3 weeks later, Bowmaker lingered on the porch of the newly built ranch house, watching Theodora hang the laundry on the line stretched between 2 cottonwood trees. Along with a complete unit of federal agents, Battlemaster Riverbend had arrived, arresting the remaining members of Silvermane's organization and officially exonerating Bowmaker and Theodora. Once the evidence was released, the conspiracy swiftly fell apart. Their general turned out to be Klaus Richter, a former Prussian military officer already wanted by federal agents for similar machinations in other territories. With Weiss dead and their scheme exposed, the network completely disintegrated. Theodora glanced up from the washing and noticed Bowmaker observing her. She offered a smile, the most genuine expression he had witnessed from her since that day of anguish in the kitchen. Approaching him, she questioned, "Do you have any regrets?" Bowmaker reflected on his uncle, the achievement of justice, and the thwarting of plots. He also considered the woman who had begun as a frantic unknown, offering herself for safety, and had evolved into his companion in every important way. As he grasped her hand, he replied that he had none, not even one. If this story touched you, give it a like and tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Subscribe to Frontier Stories and join us as we continue to tell stories of hope, resilience, and the beautiful, messy truth of Wild West.